Over the past little while, I've created a couple of videos in which I talk about games that I'm taking out of my collection to sell, that are getting added to my games to auction pile, and talking about why I have decided to sell those particular games. In my last video, I mentioned that I do pull the games off my shelf that I'm interested in selling, and then have my wife take a look over them to decide whether she wants to keep any of those games and put them back on the shelf, or whether she's okay with me selling them and putting them in the auction pile. In the comments section of that video, one of my viewers named Elias Hartmark asked the question, well, what are those games that you were willing to sell that your wife did not want you to sell? And so that inspired me to create this video talking about the games that my wife liked too much to get rid of at this point, as well as the reasons that she wanted to keep them. So thank you, Elias, for asking that question and for inspiring this video. And let's get into this list of games. Alright, we'll go through these games one by one, and my wife was kind enough to write a little comment for each game, which I'll read to you explaining why she wanted to keep the game. We'll start off small here with Deep Sea Adventure, which is this tiny little push your luck game of diving down as deep as you can to get the most valuable treasures and then still make it up to the surface without running out of oxygen. It's a game we've often played with about 4 players and had a fair bit of fun with. I was feeling personally that it could go either way, that it could be played out for me. On the other hand, I know that I would have fun if I did continue to play it, but here are the reasons that my wife wanted me to keep the game. In my wife's comments, she talks about the fact that it's an extremely simple game to learn, and yet it's not necessarily an easy game to play. She says, no matter who we have played this with, the mechanism has thrown people off, and I still haven't mastered it. I love watching people think that it is easy, and then realizing how hard it actually is to accomplish. It is a quick game to whip out, and every person we have played it with has enjoyed it as far as I can remember. Also, it fits well in my purse, and I'm not willing to give up the dream of pub gaming yet. That's something we used to do all the time in the pre-children years, as we would go to the pub, have a couple of pints, play a little game on the table there, and so obviously it's something she'd like to get back to once life gets us to that point again. So that was Deep Sea Adventure. Our next little portable game here is a small game with a long title called The Great Heartland Hauling Company. This is a very simple pick up and deliver game where each player is driving a truck around, picking up goods, trying to sell them for the most profit, using a sort of ticket to ride style card selection process of taking cards into your hand to then use them to move around and pick up and sell goods. We've gotten a lot of use out of this game for a lot of years, and I thought that maybe we had better pick up and deliver games at this point, that maybe we could finally sell it, even though the kids are now getting to a point where they might be interested in trying the game out. But here's my wife's comments on the game. This is one I think the boys will like in a couple of years. I guess she agrees with me on that. I forgot she had said that. I like the collect and deliver feature and how much is packed into a small game. I have never won this game despite my best efforts. I didn't realize that, considering how many years we've had it and how many times we've played it. I guess it's one I tend to win a lot, maybe. So I have never won this game despite my best efforts, which both annoys and challenges me. I sort of agree with her on that. Games that I lose are games that I tend to come back to just for the experience of overcoming that challenge, or at least attempting to do so. I have also always enjoyed playing it. My earring's falling apart. And yeah, it's one of those games that is an enjoyable little game. It's not super exciting by any means, but it's always kind of fun to pull out and play, and it's kind of a filler level thing. It plays quickly for sure and doesn't have a lot to learn rule-wise. So yeah, I guess it's one that we'll try as a family sometime and see how it goes over with the kids. While I'm on the topic of simple pick up and deliver games, I should talk about Rhodan, the Cosmic League. This is another one we've had for years and years and played many, many times, and I wasn't entirely sure that I wanted to sell it, so I wasn't necessarily disappointed that my wife chose to keep it. There are some interesting surface similarities actually between these two games, in that they are both very simple games based on picking up goods and then selling them for profit. And they both have this kind of ingenious little leveling up system, or kind of a tech upgrade thing that is just a really simple system within a very simple game, but it works really effectively in allowing the players to feel like they're progressing a little bit and getting a little bit better. Of the two, I would pick Perry Rhodan over the Great Heartland Hauling Company anytime, except for the fact that Perry Rhodan is strictly a two-player game, whereas Heartland here plays 2 to 4, so that's kind of the difference between the two games. If you want to play with more than 2 players, you're going to have to go with Heartland. So here's what my wife said about Perry Rhodan. I just remember enjoying this one. The same as 1 or 2 other games on this list, I want to play it at least one more time before parting with it. But I also think I might be mixing it up with Tiny Epic Galaxies, which is the next game I guess I will mention now that it has been brought up. Again, sticking on the theme of little games that are kind of ingenious in the amount of gameplay they pack into a tiny package, this was a little Kickstarter treasure here that I had acquired. Originally, I had the base game, Tiny Epic Galaxies, and then eventually they had kickstarted the Beyond the Black series of expansions, which added a bunch of interesting stuff to the game. We only ever played the Beyond the Black expansions one time so far, I believe, although we've played the base game a whole lot. And this is sort of my favorite of the Yahtzee style roll dice until you're done rolling dice or can't roll dice anymore, and then using your dice to do stuff. It's pretty amazing how much has been packed into this little game, like I said earlier, in the feel of an expanding galactic civilization with a minimal rule set and a playtime that is well under an hour, although the Beyond the Black does add a lot of both complexity and I think time to the gameplay, if I remember correctly. But my wife says about this game, I honestly can't say why this is a game I enjoy. Sorry, I just know that I really like it. Also, again, good pub game. And now that I sit here and think about it, the base game really is just a great game. I don't know if it's simply the fact that the expansion adds so much and kind of makes me feel slightly overwhelmed, that maybe that's the reason I had decided to put it on the sell pile, that I just didn't want to have to keep relearning all the little bits that the expansion adds to the game. I mean, if that is the case, the base game is definitely one we can keep coming back to and have fun with, I'm sure. Oh, this next one here, I should have maybe mentioned after Deep Sea Adventure, because it's another small-sized push-your-luck game called Port Royal. Players are essentially taking turns flipping up cards one at a time until they choose to either stop flipping cards and get some rewards, or push their luck a little too far and lose their turn. Now I know some people say press your luck, but that's just wrong. Yet again, another small game with a lot of really interesting things going on there and some fun and laughs to be had with the push your luck aspect of it. My wife says, this is one I want to keep to play with the boys. Again, it is small enough to fit in my purse and I can take it places easily. I think the boys would enjoy it now. Plus, it is a good game to take out for non-gamers. And that would be true. There's a little bit more going on than in Deep Sea Adventure, but it's definitely not terribly complex. And then there will be one more smaller sized game before we get into a couple of big ones here. And the smaller one is Agricola, All Creatures Great and Small. The original Agricola, upon which this was obviously inspired and based, is a game that I never enjoyed. Didn't like Agricola at all. However, when they came out with this tiny, compact 2-player version, I just really enjoyed it. My wife and I played it a lot over the years, had a lot of fun with it. It's very basic worker placement and building up your own little farm. I even upgraded the components with some clay resources and whatnot to go with the cool wooden animals. So there's a really fun visual aspect to the game. And my wife had more to say about this one than any of the others on the list. Here's what she says. With this one, I just feel like I didn't get to play it enough yet. I remember liking it, especially the pieces. I guess that's what I was talking about with the upgraded components. I don't remember what they are called. I'm not sure if it's the animals or the upgraded resources that she's mentioning here. I wasn't prepared to get rid of it until I had a chance to play it again, knowing that at the time it ticked a lot of the boxes for games I enjoy. Sorry I can't be more specific than that. I don't remember it very well, but I remember the cute pieces. Is that weird? Absolutely not. I am totally somebody who enjoys a game more if there's a great tactile and visual aspect to the game. That's why I spend so much time upgrading the components of the games I own. And yeah, on reflection, I do think this would be a really great introduction to the concept of worker placement for my kids, so I'm glad we have hung on to this one. Now the big ticket items. This is one that I put on the list without knowing that I really did actually want to sell it. And this is Viticulture, the strategic game of winemaking. I believe that the very first game I ever kickstarted was the original Viticulture, and then I ended up kickstarting the second edition along with the original Tuscany expansion stuff. So this box is crammed full and weighs a ton because it has all of that old Tuscany stuff as well as the second edition Viticulture stuff. And it is a huge, expansive worker placement game of starting with a very small vineyard and growing it into something bigger so that you can produce wine to make points. I think the reason it was on the list was just because of both the mental and physical work involved in playing the game, in that from a physical standpoint, there's a ton of components. It takes me a long time to set it up and take it down after a game. And there's just so much going on and so many interlocking mechanisms that you need to focus on. It's just kind of a large information load, I guess, as you're playing the game. Not that it's at all a complicated game or a really hard game to play. There's just something about it that I can't really put my finger on in terms of the mental side of playing Viticulture. All the same, it is a beautifully produced game and really well designed and interesting in the whole building up an efficient winemaking engine type of thing, with a lot of interconnected steps in the process. I assumed it would be one that my wife chose to keep because it has been one of her favorites since we first got the original game, and here's what she says about it. Actually, this is the one she had the most to say about. I'm not sure I'll ever want to part with this one. I love the theme, the board, pieces, and the way the game is played is so on point with the blending of theme and gameplay. I like the fact that there are so many ways to get points, and the strategy can change each time. I will always enjoy games that have a build or level up feature, if that makes sense. Totally. It's all about kind of starting small and growing into your own customized efficiency engine or whatever it is you're making, I guess. It's one of the things I like about Clash of Cultures. That's another favorite with both her and I. That's a huge, expansive civilization game where you start off with a tiny little city and worker, and over the course of several hours end up with a big civilization. So it's that whole concept of starting with very little and then just creating your own world out of that, I guess. The investing and building up your winery is just so cool. But in any case, I'm not at all surprised that she chose to keep Viticulture. I've got another big heavy box full of stuff here with near and far. Which is kind of a storytelling adventuring game. For me personally, this one was so close to being a great game, but for me it fell short both on the storytelling aspect and on the gameplay aspect. On the storytelling side of things, I felt that the little paragraphs that compiled your adventure were actually not very well written. Some people will say, oh, for a board game it's great writing, but that's a pretty low bar to set for writing. I also just didn't really like the story that it told as it went along, although we've only played through 2 of the characters' stories. From the gameplay perspective, it was pretty fun. There was some interesting things happening, although we did have to house rule it a bit in order to allow each player to fully complete their story as the series of games went on, which I did feel was a major shortfall of the game. But that's just my opinions. My wife says, I love the art. I can't disagree with that. Ryan Lockett, who is the designer near and far, is also the illustrator and artist, as he is for almost all of his games. I love the storytelling, and that's where I would disagree. I really enjoy the actual mechanics of the game. Again, I had some issues with that. But to have it backed up with a storyline that continues on makes it even better. And yeah, that part is really cool, where as you play through each game, the story of your character continues and carries on where it left off, which is really neat. Also, the fact that the maps are this flip book, where each map you play on is 2 pages of the flip book, and then you can flip through to the next map for your next game. But the fact that it is a cohesive world where you're not just having a totally random series of events happening to you, which is a problem I had with Tales of the Arabian Nights, one of the kind of earlier storytelling games. It was a game where you just had a whole series of completely random things happening to you that were not connected narratively in any way, and where your own choices in the game had completely random results. So this is one where I am happy with the fact that it does tell a very cohesive beginning to end narrative. So I totally agree with that aspect of it. And there is one final game here in this list, and that is a game called Lost Valley, the Yukon Gold Rush: 1896. We had the original Lost Valley game, and then ultimately when this version, the Yukon Gold Rush, came to Kickstarter, I jumped on that in order to pick up this copy of it. And from the earlier version to this one, this has been a favorite with my wife for a very long time. It's an interesting game of exploration and this kind of open world adventure game where you're mining for gold and exploring the world and just trying to gain points through a variety of different ways. For me, it worked well as either a 2-player game or a 4-player game. But if you had a situation where you had 3 players with 2 players on one side of the river while the other player was on the other side of the river all on their own, the problem is the player who was on their own tended to be able to get a lot more resources, not having to compete with another player, so it didn't work great as a 3-player game. Overall, I still do find it to be a good game, one that I wouldn't mind at all playing. It's just that in comparison to a lot of the other new games we have now, it doesn't quite hold up as much as them, but I don't have a lot of negative things to say about it. And here's what my wife ended up saying about Lost Valley. I've changed my mind about this one. I'm okay to sell it. I'm a little surprised by that because it has been one of her #1 favorites for many, many years. But I would have to assume that, like me, she agrees that we have so many great games now that it's not going to be the first one we get to when we want to play a game together. So thank you again, Elias, for inspiring this video. And from you, I would like to know, are there any games you've sold that you've regretted selling? Are there games you've let go that you wish you could get back again? As for me, I really got to get my auction up and running. I've had all these games sitting here for weeks and just haven't had time to get that thing organized. I need the money! The preceding video has been brought to you free of charge by me, Josh. The only thing I ask in return is that you could do one of the following. Give me a thumb up, push the subscribe button, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Cheers! This is an extremely basic pick up and deliver type of game where you are each driving a truck. And my wife had more to say about this one than any of the others. And overall, but I love the story. What's life?